In 2004, a student at the University of Missouri was found dead on campus, just a block from his accommodation. The details of the case quickly came to light, and it was not long before the police discovered that the main suspect was a witness at the crime scene itself. This is the story of Jesse Valencia. The University of Missouri is located in Columbia, United States. It has capacity for approximately 30,000 students, making it the largest university in the state. The campus complex includes numerous academic buildings and student accommodation. In the early hours of Saturday morning, June 5th, 2004, some students were walking through a public space in the university when they noticed a boy lying in between two buildings. They approached him to check that he was okay. It was not uncommon for students to get drunk at parties, then pass out somewhere on their way home. But as they got closer, they discovered that the boy was half naked, wearing only blue sleeping shorts, and that he was lying in a pool of blood. He was clearly lifeless. This boy was identified by another student. His name was Jesse Valencia. Jesse James Wade was born in Danville, Kentucky, United States on February 22, 1981. Jesse's mother's name was Linda, and some sources say that his father did not want any relationship with his son, while others say that Linda did not know who his father was. What is certain is that when Jesse was born, he was given only his mother's surname, but this changed when Linda met Lupe Valencia. When Jesse was still an infant, Linda and Lupe married and Lupe adopted Jesse. Jesse was given Lupe's surname and became Jesse James Wade Valencia. Linda and Lupe went on to have two daughters, Rachel and Maria. Jesse always had a very close relationship with his mother, so much so that in his early adolescence he told her that he was gay because he didn't want to hide it from her. He had been afraid of what her reaction might be, but felt that it was the right thing to do. In fact, from that day on, the two were closer than ever. They were really great friends. Jesse did some work as a photographic model, and despite many saying that he would do well in this profession, he decided that he wanted to become a lawyer. He studied hard and secured a place at the University of Missouri. In 2004, at the age of 23, Jesse was excelling in his studies. He was popular, had many friends, and worked part-time as a clerk at a roadside hotel. He was considered by many to be attractive, charming, and wasn't shy about initiating conversations with boys he was interested in. Despite this happy and prosperous life, his story ended prematurely in the early hours of June 5th. Jesse's body was sent for forensic analysis, and the police began their preliminary investigations. They gathered information from witness after witness and soon put together the pieces of the puzzle. Jesse's student accommodation was about a block from where he was found. When detectives went to his room, they found that the door was open, but there were no visible signs of forced entry or that any theft had occurred. In his bathroom, they found a used condom from which they collected DNA samples. The test results revealed the profiles of two individuals. One was Jesse himself, and the other was that of a second unidentified person. It was discovered that Jesse worked his shift the previous evening, then went to a party on the campus. He drank a lot and became very drunk. Several people said they saw him at the party, but they could not remember seeing him leave. Most likely he left without saying goodbye to anyone. His cell phone was found in his room. Call records showed that he had phoned Ed McDevitt in the early hours of the 5th. The call took place at 3:13 in the morning and lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The police found this student and questioned him. Ed confirmed that he and Jesse were getting to know each other, meeting regularly, and that the last time they had met was on the night of June 3rd, less than 48 hours before he died. He stated that on the morning the crime had taken place, he had been in his student accommodation with his roommate. The roommate confirmed this alibi. Ed provided a DNA sample, which was later confirmed to be the second DNA sample found on the condom. The police could not arrest him because they had no concrete evidence to link him to the crime, but he remained under suspicion and the watchful eye of the authorities. In the autopsy report, Coroner Valerie Rao estimated that Jesse was killed before dawn at the same location where he was found. There were suffocation marks on his neck, and there was a puncture made by a knife. There were no defensive wounds on his hands that would evidence self-defense. There was bruising on his back and chest caused by what Rao called intense compression. A police instructor present during the examination viewed the bruises and suggested that they may have been the result of a restraint technique performed incorrectly. DNA was found under Jesse's fingernails from 2 individuals, one of whom was his friend Ed's. Small dark hairs were found on his neck, chest and back that were neither Jesse's nor Ed's. Analysis determined that these were hairs from a person's forearm, most likely his attacker's. Further examination confirmed that the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation and that the puncture wound in Jesse's neck was inflicted post-mortem. Jesse's mother was traumatized but did her best to help the police with the investigation. She told them everything that she knew, and this information was invaluable to the investigation as Jesse hid nothing from her. Jesse had spoken to her about a relationship he was having with a police officer. He did not tell her his name because he didn't believe that the police officer had given him his real name. According to Linda, Jesse felt that the officer was obsessed with him and had started to become a nuisance. Furthermore, he was also beginning to suspect that the officer was actually married, and so Jesse wanted to end their relationship. Her testimony perfectly matched that of Jesse's friend Andy Schermerhorn, who had presented himself at local police station to bring information which, unbeknownst to him, would serve as key evidence in solving the case. Andy and Jesse had known each other for a few months and considered themselves as friends with benefits. That is, they shared intimate encounters but were not in a relationship. They had met up about 7 times. On one occasion, while Andy was in Jesse's apartment, something unusual happened. He told the police that 3 weeks previously, in the middle of the night, they were sleeping in bed together when someone knocked at the door. Jesse got out of bed, put on a robe and opened it. Andy couldn't hear their conversation, so he got up, looked through a crack in the bedroom door, and he saw Jesse talking to a police officer. The officer was in uniform and was pointing a flashlight around the room. Andy got scared, put on his underwear, went back to bed, and hid under the blanket. Seconds later, Jesse returned to the room with the police officer. He told Andy that the officer was a friend of his and that he wanted to take part in a threesome. Andy accepted. When they finished, the officer got up quickly, put on his uniform, said that no one could know he had been there and left. He just arrived, did what he wanted, and left. Andy was invited to come down to a police station in Colombia where the primary investigation was being coordinated. He was asked to give a statement and look at photos from the Columbia Police Department yearbook to hopefully identify the officer. As soon as Andy entered the room and before the officer even opened the yearbook, He had turned pale and started shaking. He was clearly frightened. Andy had just seen the man they were looking for in the corridor. That police officer was Stephen Rios, 27 years old, married, with a child just a few weeks old. He had worked in the department for almost 3 years and had been involved in the investigation of Jesse's death from the beginning. He had even attended the scene of the crime when Jesse's body was discovered. According to his colleagues, Stephen was a respected member of the force. They described him as a strict, rule-following police officer. The officers at the station were shocked to learn that Stephen could be involved, but they remained professional. They took Andy's statement and kept his personal information from Stephen while the investigation continued. According to a friend of Jesse's called Joan Sheridan, Jesse and Stephen had met 2 months earlier when the police were called to a party on campus. Jesse, who was drunk as usual, ended up getting into a fight with Stephen. He was handcuffed and put in a police car. As the officer drove Jesse to the station, he asked him some personal questions. At the police station, Jesse was booked for contempt of authority and released. The next day, Stephen went to Jesse's apartment saying he had more questions. But what he really wanted was sex. Joan said that Jesse agreed to have sex with him because he promised to drop the contempt charges. But the officer became a nuisance over the following weeks. He would show up unannounced, demanding to have sex with Jesse, and the charges were never dropped. Time passed, and Jesse grew tired of the situation. He had mentioned to Joan in the week that he was killed, that the next time the officer showed up, he was going to tell him that he didn't want him to visit anymore. If he didn't stop, Jesse was going to go to the police to file a harassment allegation against him. But Jesse said that while he would say this, he would not actually do it. He suspected that the police officer was married and that the threat alone would make him stop showing up. Having received this information, Stephen was questioned by the investigation team. Initially, he denied having sexual relations with Jesse, but when confronted with the witnesses' information, he admitted that the two had indeed been having intimate encounters. However, he denied having any involvement in the crime, saying that on that night he was at home in bed with his wife. Stephen agreed to provide a DNA sample and was released. The analysis of Stephen's DNA was compared with the DNA from the hair of the third unidentified individual, and the result was positive. However, this did not prove his involvement in the murder, especially now that he had confirmed his intimate encounters with the victim. Hours later, Stephen made a call to the police captain, Zim Schwarzer, crying. He said that he had done something very wrong and that he was in Kansas City, about 250 kilometers away from the police station. He told her that he had a shotgun. Zim believed that Stephen intended to take his own life. After a long conversation, she convinced him to return to Colombia. As soon as he arrived, Stephen was sent to a mental health clinic for observation for 4 days until a medical report was issued. However, the following day, Stephen escaped from his room, climbed onto a roof terrace and threatened to jump. Police convinced him to come down and brought him back to the facility. This behavior was interpreted by the police as confirmation that Stephen believed he could not escape the accusations made against him. Detectives then reviewed Stephen's police file and discovered that he had not passed the defensive tactics course during his training. One of the techniques was called shoulder pin, where an officer positions himself behind the person to be restrained. He passes his right arm under their armpit, wrapping it across their chest and neck, putting pressure on the opposite shoulder, and with the other hand tightly grips his right arm, causing the person to faint. In other words, despite being a police officer, he was prohibited from performing this technique on third parties until he had passed the course. The marks on Jesse's body indicated that this technique had been used to subdue him. Finally, investigators discovered that while Stephen was actually at his home on the night of the crime, there was a period of 45 minutes in which no one could confirm his whereabouts. Stephen Rios was charged with first-degree murder, where there is an intent to kill, as it was understood that the death, even though it was not premeditated, was also not an accident. At the trial hearings, which began the following year in 2005, Stephen pleaded not guilty. The prosecution's argument was presented by Morley Swingle, who said the following: "On the night Jesse was killed, Stephen showed up at his apartment uninvited, as he always did. Jesse warned him that he no longer wanted to meet with him and threatened to tell Stephen's superiors about his visits if he didn't leave him alone. This enraged the police officer, who did not want the relationship to end, but also wanted to keep it a secret from his work and family. Stephen became aggressive, grabbed a knife and threatened Jesse. Jesse ran outside wearing only his pajama shorts, but Stephen caught up with him and applied the restraining technique he was barred from performing. The two fought until Jesse suffocated. It is not known whether Stephen made a single puncture wound in the victim's neck to cover up the suffocation, or whether it was just in a fit of rage. He left and discarded the weapons somewhere in the city. It was never found. Finally, he returned home and lay down next to his wife. During the trial, an instructor demonstrated to the prosecutor the immobilization technique which Stephen had used on Jesse. Valerie Leftwich, Stephen's lawyer, attempted to defame Jesse's character. She described him as promiscuous. She added that there was evidence that Jesse had sexual relations with many men he had met online or in bars. They were all strangers, which meant that any of them could easily have been considered suspects. The lawyer could only create new suspects instead of refuting the accusations which directly incriminated her client. On May 2005, the jury found Stephen guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His conviction was overturned by the Missouri Court of Appeals, and a new trial took place in 2008. He was found guilty again and sentenced to life in prison once again, but this time with authorization to apply for parole in 2035. In several interviews, Stephen's wife, Libby Rios, expressed her belief that he was innocent and should be freed. However, she later separated from him and married someone else. Jesse was a young boy who was doing what many do, studying, working, and enjoying life. He had the misfortune to become entangled with a man who harassed him, persecuted him, and sought to control him. Jesse wanted to end their relationship, but unfortunately, he became the victim of his tormentor. If you've made it this far, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to this channel. Also, add your opinion in our comments. Thank you very much. I will see you in the next case.